Chief, on the issue of bringing in contract employees, Officer Papathanacio has suggested that the union rep, that this would be a problem for them. Do you want to talk about how you're going to deal with that? Obviously, in my view, a bigger problem for them is the overwork and the extended stress of being short so many officers. But tell me how you plan to work with the officers who are concerned about bringing in non-sworn officers to do even parts of this work.
So I've been in discussions with the union about this specific issue. They have mentioned a number of concerns, and our conversations and our intent is to try and address those concerns because I think what we agree on is that these officers need some relief, that we need to allow these officers to get more time off, to stop being held over on their shifts, to stop being forced to work overtime when they would rather be home with their families. So again, I've talked about the strategies that we have in place, but the contract security would be a temporary solution until we can get more officers hired. And my intent is to try and address the concerns that the union has with regard to where these contract security officers are assigned.
And for that program to really work, what kind of temporary program would it be? Would you anticipate a multi-year bid or a one-year bid with possible extensions, or what are you thinking about as you begin to think about how you look for these contract employees?
So I look, realistically, I think it's going to take us at least 2 to 3 years to get up to our staffing in terms of hiring new officers. So having that as an option to use over the next 2 or 3 years, I would like to have that option.
Just to be sure we're straight on this, hiring the officers to get to the officers you currently are allowed to have is the problem here, as opposed to the Congress saying we're going to give you 100 more officers than you're currently capped at. That's an unrealistic moment for us to think about. Your goal is to fill the slots that you already have been allowed to have, and you're 400 short. Are you 400 short right now of meeting that number?
Yeah, actually 457 short.
457?
Yes, sir.
If I understood your thought also of hiring 280 new officers a year for the next 3 years, understanding that other officers will retire and find other opportunities, and that number sounds about right to me to get up to where you need to be. How long is the training process from the time you bring an officer into the training environment until you have them available for service?
From the time they're hired to the time you can actually deploy them by themselves is close to a year.
Close to a year. So hiring people, annuitants who have retired but are willing to come back to work is one of your thoughts?
That's correct, because you'd be hiring back someone who has that experience, and they could go back to work day one.
And when you hire laterally, would you just try to evaluate the level of training that officer already has, and then determine what additional training is necessary before you put them into the line?
Exactly, yes.
All right. I think every police force in America, certainly every big police force in America, has a lot of that same challenge of just people leaving either the big force for a smaller force in some other community, or leaving with frustration of this whole idea that somehow defunding the police was ever any real option for the country. The Inspector General's testified before us that he thinks that, in his view, restructuring to where the U.S. Capitol Police was more of a protective agency instead of a law enforcement agency. I'm not absolutely sure I know what he means by that, but why don't you give us your sense of what, after 6 months on the job, what's your vision of what the Capitol Police Force would look like 2 years from now and 5 years from now, and maybe even longer, if you've thought through the way that this force should function to best do its job?
Well, thank you for asking that question. First, I think that where I agree with the Inspector General is the fact that we need to expand and enhance our ability to investigate threats against Congress, to provide protection to members against Congress, to our counter-surveillance activities, to enhance security in the home districts, as I've mentioned. So in that regard, we need to expand our protection capabilities. But we make no mistake, we continue to have to be a police department as well. The difference between the U.S. Capitol and the White House or the CIA or other facilities is that we are open to the public. Someone can walk in off the street, now not now because of COVID, but someone could walk in off the sidewalk, come through the doors and say, "I just like to look around. I want to walk around." So we deal with the public every day. We deal with demonstrations every day. We have to respond to crimes most days. We are handling demonstrations. We're making arrests. We're staffing posts. We do crowd control, visitor control, employee screening, crime prevention, response to calls for service, crisis negotiations, all of which are part of being a police department. So while I agree that we need to expand our protection capabilities, I don't think that we can walk too far away from our police responsibilities as well, because they will remain. So in answer to your question about where I think we need to go, one of the ways that I believe that we need to expand our protection capabilities is to take the work that we do in terms of investigating threats, take our intelligence responsibilities, and make those investigatory and intelligence responsibilities and create a new bureau, and have a new assistant chief, an additional assistant chief. So you'd have, I think our dignitary protection and protection responsibilities have grown. That continues to grow. The need there, the workload has increased. Uniformed services will always likely be the largest bureau that we have, but looking at intelligence and investigations and creating a new bureau with its own assistant chief, I believe, is the direction that we need to go. This then speaks directly to the IG's recommendation that to move toward more of a protection focus, because that's what this would allow the department to do.
Thank you. I'll have more questions later if we have time for a second round. Thank you, Chairman. Chief, there have been some concerns expressed about individuals in senior leadership jobs in the department. You've been there 6 months. What are you doing to address those concerns among the officers themselves?
So, right after the 6th, the chief of police resigned. Both sergeant of arms in the day or two after the 6th were gone. In the weeks after that, there were our director of intelligence left. We had an assistant chief retire. We had two deputy chiefs retire. We had our director of security services. The two high-ranking civilian directors in our agency, intelligence and security services, left. So when I got here, if you look at the top level of our organization and the top 11 people, sworn and civilian, in our organization, 6 were gone. I had less than half of the leadership positions with the folks that were here on the 6th. And so as soon as I got here, my first order of business was to assess my leadership team and assess and look at who was here just biding their time, waiting to see what happens, and who was here working as hard as I was going to work in improving, making the improvements this agency required. And for the past 6 months, I've made that assessment. And I made that assessment, in light of discussions with the sergeant of arms, in light of discussions with past Capitol Police chiefs. I've made it in light of the no confidence votes that the union held, and I considered all that information. But what the bottom line, when I assess someone's performance, I look at what have they done since the 6th? What have they done to help this agency, to improve this agency? And so I've made those assessments. And I know that part of my leadership team that is working as hard as I am to make the changes that need to be made. And I know that there are still a lot of people that have differing opinions. I still understand that the union stands by its vote of no confidence. But the fact of the matter is, Senator, that a vote of no confidence is not an objective evaluation of someone's performance. It has meaning. A vote of no confidence has meaning. But I am trying to evaluate people's performance objectively in terms of what they're doing to help this organization. And so as I move forward, I do think I need to add an assistant chief to my leadership team, because for all reasons I talked about, that move toward being a more protective agency. And so as I make my decisions about where we're going to be in 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, I'm now at a point where I'm ready to talk more publicly about what we need, come to the oversight committees, go to the Capitol Police Board about changes that needed to be, organizational changes that need to be made. Because I can't make an organizational change without approval from the Capitol Police Board and this oversight committee. And so the time is now to have those discussions, to talk about the bigger plan, and understanding that not everybody's going to agree with my assessment, not everybody's going to agree with the direction that I may want to go. But I'm the one responsible for this department, and I'm the one responsible for the safety and security of this campus. And so the decisions I make are not, I had no predisposed notion about anybody. I made these decisions based on the last 6 months and my assessment of my leadership team and my assessment of the department and where we need to go to be in a better position to fulfill our mission.
Well, thanks, Chief. I think that's, I'm very supportive of, one, understanding all the vacancies you already had when you came to the job, and two, taking that time to evaluate not only who you had, but what you needed. I think I can speak for the chairman of the committee, and certainly I can for myself, and we're looking forward to working with you as you come up with any reorganizational structure that, as you pointed out, this committee would have to approve. But after decades of work as a chief of police, and after now you're beginning to get in the second 6 months of your work here, beginning to make some of those permanent decisions, I think is important, and we look forward to working with you on those. I think my last question would be, of the unresolved recommendations from the IG or from the 5 big recommendations we made in our June report, which do you think are the most important to try to resolve as quickly as you can?
The intelligence recommendations, the operational planning recommendations, and making sure that we've got the CDU situation squared away. Those were the top 3, I think, priorities.
Good. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair.